And it's 10 o'clock and it's time for our next session with Petter. The show is yours, Petter.
All right, thank you. Let me just share my screen then. Like so, I guess.
Perfect.
Yeah. All right. Like Jürgen said, I am Petter Arnesen. I work as a senior consultant with Aztec. I've been there for about 6 months now, and I work mainly on the Azure infrastructure side of things. But before I joined Aztec, I was working a whole lot on the Microsoft 365 side of things, doing migrations, security projects, adoption things, before slowly transitioning to the Azure side of things. But because of that, I feel like I have a foot in the Microsoft 365 world and one in the Azure world, with Windows 365 falling kind of in between those two. So I guess that's part of the reason why it felt so close to my heart when it was announced. I'm at most socials as Petter Tech. I have a YouTube channel, Twitter, GitHub, LinkedIn. So you feel free to follow me around everywhere. But on to today's agenda. The title is why, when, and when not. But I figured it was a good idea to start with what, just to say some words about what Windows 365 is, so that we're on a well, so to say, a level playing field there. And I also wanted to go through a couple of sample designs, just to kind of spark some inspiration in how you can design your own Windows 365 solutions. And if time permits, I'll also do a really quick recap of the news that was around Windows 365 on Ignite last week. For those who know me, they know that I tend to speed along quite rapidly when I'm nervous. So I can safely assume that it will be time for Ignite news in the end here. So let's just start by what is this Windows 365 thing anyway? Well, I could say that it's a lot of things, but let's take a look at what Microsoft says it is on their product website. And yeah, it's hybrid Windows for a hybrid world, simplify management, ensure business continuity. If you have ever been to the Windows 365 product website, this is what you see. And from this, it's quite easy to understand what Windows 365 is. No. So thankfully, there's an FAQ there, and the top question there is, what is Windows 365? And well, as it says, Windows 365 is the world's first cloud PC. Windows 365 securely streams your personalized Windows desktop apps, settings, and content from the cloud to any device, and so on, and so on, and so on. And well, to be honest, based on this, I'm not that much wiser, but you can pick up a couple of hints here and there, like the term cloud PC might indicate that it has something to do with PCs in the cloud. And yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's virtual PCs running in the cloud, and it's running in Microsoft's cloud to be exact. Yeah, so all the fluff from the previous slides can be summed up in this one sentence. And having it running in Microsoft's cloud, it has some benefits, like the fact that it's always ready. There's no need to wait around for it to power on, for example. You can access it from basically any device. I wouldn't be as bold as Microsoft when they claim that it's accessible from any device, because you might stumble upon some old or quirky hardware that doesn't have an HTML5 compatible browser or support a Windows 365 client. So I would say it's accessible from basically any device. And the Windows 365 cloud PCs, as they're called, are personal. They're not shared with anyone. So you don't have to worry about someone else hogging all the resources on that cloud PC, or cluttering up the C drive or anything like that. It is yours and yours alone. You don't have to share it with anybody else. And speaking of sharing, Windows 365 does share the control plane that Azure Virtual Desktop has. And The control plane is basically what you as a user connect to and what handles your session. It's what speaks to your Cloud PC for you, so that the Cloud PCs themselves don't have to be exposed to the internet. And if you're familiar with the RDS roles from Windows servers, the control plane is what handles these kind of roles. You have the gateway, the connection broker, the web interface, and all those infrastructure side roles. And Windows 365, like Azure Virtual Desktop, uses what Microsoft likes to call cold potato routing, meaning that once you connect to Windows 365, your connection from your end device is routed to the nearest possible control plane and then enters Microsoft's global network from there. And the traffic stays within Microsoft's global network all the way to your Cloud PC and then all the way back again. That way your connection would be more stable, more reliable, and in most cases even faster than if you were using something like a hot potato routing, where your traffic will be jumping around from network to network, and you have little to no control over what kind of setup is in those networks. So the cold potato routing means that your connection will go to the nearest control plane, meaning the control plane that has the lowest latency to you. And then from there, it's all handled by Microsoft. And Windows 365 comes in two different editions. You have the Windows 365 Business Edition and you have the Windows 365 Enterprise Edition. These are priced the same, assuming you're eligible for hybrid benefits. If you're connecting to Windows 365 from Windows 10 Pro or Windows 11 Pro, you are eligible for hybrid benefit. If not, then that's an additional $4 cost to the license. And the enterprise flavor also has one additional cost over the business flavor, and that is for bandwidth. With the enterprise flavor of Windows 365, you have to pay for bandwidth usage in addition to the Windows 365 license. The business does not have this additional cost, but it does have an outbound data volume cap. This cap is raised as you go up in the SKUs. So the more expensive Windows 365 license also has a higher volume cap, but it's still a cap. Enterprise, on the other hand, doesn't have this cap, but then again, you pay for the bandwidth. It's not a whole lot, but it's still a cost. The business flavor of Windows 365 is super simple. It's a matter of purchasing a license, assigning it to a user, and waiting around for the Cloud PC to be provisioned. While the enterprise flavor it's a little bit more work in setting up, as it has some needs. For example, it's only available in specific Azure regions. The business flavor doesn't have this requirement, but it also doesn't allow you to control where your Cloud PCs will be. The list of supported Azure regions for Windows 365 Enterprise currently contains 14 regions, if I remember correctly. There's 5 of them in the US and there's 4 of them in Europe, and the rest of them is scattered across the globe. So the Windows 365 Enterprise can only be used in regions on this supported region list. You also need to have an Azure subscription with a VNet in it, and your Windows 365 Enterprise Cloud PCs will then be connected to this VNet, and from that VNet, they need to have a direct line of sight to Active Directory, because yes, Windows 365 Enterprise requires you to have an Active Directory. And that Active Directory also needs to be in sync with Azure AD using AD Connect, and you need to have enabled hybrid Azure AD joining. This is because your enterprise cloud PCs will be joined to that Active Directory and then hybrid joined to Azure AD in order to be managed there. This also means that your users need to be in Active Directory and synced to Azure AD. If you're only an Azure AD company now, then you would need to add Active Directory. And because you have the requirement for hybrid Azure AD joining, you can't use services like Azure AD domain services, sadly. Another thing you need to have is a working setup of Intune or MEM. And that is because Intune or MEM is used to provision and manage your cloud PCs. For the business flavor, you're not doing a whole lot of provisioning and management. That's all handled for you. So the enterprise flavor has the requirement there. It also requires you to have a couple of more licenses. The business side only requires the Windows 365 license, but the enterprise flavor also requires you to have licenses for Intune, Azure AD, and for Windows, meaning that I think the cheapest you can go is the Microsoft 365 F3 license. But in case you're already using Microsoft 365 Business Premium, E3, E5, you can use those licenses that you have from before. All right, so that's the what Windows 365 is. I hope I did a better job of explaining it than I feel Microsoft did. But apart from the glaringly obvious reasons that Microsoft has for you to use Windows 365, why should you be using Windows 365? And first of all, I feel it's easy. I touched upon this earlier, but especially the Windows 365 business is it's super simple. Click, click, boom, purchase, assign, you're good to go. But even the enterprise flavor shouldn't take a whole lot of hours to set up. Of course, depending on what type of infrastructure you have from before. But say you have your infrastructure in Azure already, you have Active Directory, you have AD Connect, you have hybrid joining. If you have that from already, then setting up Windows 365 Enterprise is just a matter of setting up some provisioning policies and some on-prem connection policies. And other than that, it's the same as business. Assign license and wait around for provisioning of Cloud PC, and you're good to go. But it's not only easy from a setup and management point of view, it's also easy from a user perspective. There's no need for complicated clients that's hard to configure, where you have to follow a 10-page guide. You download the client, install it, and sign in with your Azure AD account, and you have your Windows 365 Cloud PC there. But even if you're not able to use a client, you can use the web client, making it quite accessible. There's a variety of clients, of course, that you have for Windows, for Mac, for iOS, for Android. And apart from that, you have the wonderful web clients. So if you have an HTML5 compatible browser and an internet connection, then you're able to access Windows 365, making it one of the most accessible VDI solutions out there. And this, of course, makes it user-friendly. But another reason why it's user-friendly is that it's tightly integrated into the rest of the Microsoft 365 world. So if you're already using Microsoft 365, it's familiar for your users. It's the same kind of security regime if you're already using MFA and conditional access, these kinds of things. Then the same kind of security regime applies to Windows 365. And yeah, like I said, if you can use the web client, you only need to remember windows365.microsoft.com and you're good to go. Apart from your username and password, of course, but I guess people usually remember that. This next reason, of course, depends on what you compare it against. But I would say that it's cheap. I think the cheapest Windows 365 license is $20 for the unmanaged Windows 365, aka the business flavor. You can manage this if you so want, but even if you opt for the managed one, the enterprise flavor, it's about $27 or $28 for that. If you go for the Windows 365 license and the Microsoft 365 F3. There's an additional cost for the bandwidth, of course, but that's not a whole lot. So I would say that the service itself is quite cheap, but it's not only that the service is cheap, it also enables you to, for example, purchase cheaper hardware, lower specs hardware, thin clients, things that are easily replaceable. So you can spend less money on local hardware because the workload is running in your cloud PC anyway. So You can have devices that are easily replaceable, but even if your devices doesn't break, it's also fine to let your devices age. Since the workload is running in Windows 365, it's you don't need to swap out your hardware every 3 or 4 years. You can have them age to 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 years because the workload isn't running. Because the workload is running in Windows 365, that's the resources you need. So there's not a whole lot of need for resources on the local device, meaning that they can age further. And since they can last longer, there's also less lifecycle management to do. Meaning that since your devices can now last for 4 or 5 years, there's not a necessity to lifecycle them every 3 years or so. But you can also take measures to keep company data within Windows 365 or the Microsoft 365 world so that the local device doesn't contain any. And that way the physical device isn't all that important anymore. When it comes time to recycle them, you don't need to worry about wiping them or securely deleting all the data on them. If it doesn't contain any data, then it's not that important anymore. And Windows 365 also gives you speedier onboarding. Instead of ordering a laptop, waiting for that to arrive, then you wait for the IT department to provision and prepare the device. Just order a new Windows 365 license, assign it, and wait around for like an hour or so, and your cloud PC will be ready to use. And most people these days already have a phone or a tablet or an old laptop somewhere that they can use to access that cloud PC. So the onboarding part will be a lot snappier. You can also go all BYOD and achieve happier end users because the cloud PC is where the work will be done. Let your end users decide for themselves. If they want a Mac, sure. If they want Windows, sure. If they prefer Dell or HP, Alienware, or Lenovo, it doesn't really matter because what you care about is that they are working in their cloud PCs, meaning that they can have whatever device they choose. This next point kind of ties in with the onboarding part, but it also goes for scaling down or even reassigning licenses. It's a whole lot easier scaling up and down when it's a matter of ordering new licenses and canceling those licenses. It's also much simpler to reassign a Windows 365 license than it is to reassign a device. Reassigning devices usually means a process of wiping and reprovisioning, reimaging the devices before they are prepared for a new device, for a new user. But with Windows 365, it's a matter of removing the license from one user and assigning it to a new user, and that new user will have a new cloud PC. Also, if you have scaled up and purchased a whole lot of physical devices, scaling down is, well, you often end up with a lot of hardware that's just sitting on the shelf collecting dust. It doesn't free up costs at all, but canceling licenses does. So scaling down also means that you can free up cost quite rapidly. Like I mentioned, you can take measures to make sure that data doesn't leave Windows 365 or the Microsoft 365 world, and that way you can stay fairly confident in that your company's data doesn't leave your control, so you have more control over it. And for example, for Azure Virtual Desktop, you had a feature go GA this October, which is called Screen Capture Protection, which basically just blocks the ability to take screenshots of whatever is happening within Azure Virtual Desktop. Since this went GA for AVD in October, I'm assuming that it's not too far off for Windows 365 as well, meaning that you get even more control over your company's data. Your Windows 365 cloud PC will be the same across every connection, so you will have the same workspace across every device or from wherever you connect to, meaning that your cloud PC will stay in the state that you left it always, or until your IT department patches it and reboots it, of course, but that's another story. say for instance, if you're sitting at the office working, you have some documents open, you have some applications open, you can just disconnect and go home and continue from your home computer, and you will be exactly as it left off. Or you can even do some work on the way home if you so choose. The state of the cloud PC will be the same, so we will have the same documents open, you will have the same applications open. So yeah, it's the same workspace across every device, across every connection. And for your IT department, Windows 365 will use some familiar management tools. At least if you're already invested in Microsoft 365 and Azure, then it's the same tools that they are used to be using. The user management for Windows 365 is done in Azure AD or in the Microsoft 365 admin portal. And for the business flavor, that's all the management you will be doing. If you opt for the enterprise flavor, there will be more management, but the cloud PCs themselves are managed in Endpoint Manager, and the infrastructure side of things is managed in the Azure portal. So these are the same management tools that your IT department probably will be familiar with already, meaning that you don't have to invest in training for any new management tools just for this solution. So that's a whole lot of reasons why. I hope it didn't sound too much like a selling pitch, but with all these fantastic reasons why, you can surely use Windows 365 for everything, right? Well, not exactly, but let's start by looking at when you can use it, or even when you should be using it, at least in my opinion. One of those scenarios is for startups, because as a startup, you might not have a lot of funds to invest in hardware. There's perhaps other things you want to invest in. And like I said, most people these days already have phones, tablets, some old laptops that they can use. So purchasing some Windows 365 licenses and having your users use Windows 365 instead of investing in new hardware will be a lot cheaper, at least immediately. In the long run, of course, might be better to invest in hardware, but as a startup, you might not have those kind of funds. And as a startup, you might want to have your users getting to work as soon as possible. You don't really want to hire someone and then have to wait around for that laptop to arrive and be prepared. You basically, with Windows 365, you can pick someone off the streets, hire them, and assign them a license, and an hour later they could be to work. They could be working for you. So that's one scenario where Windows 365 is a really good service to have. Another thing regarding startups is there's a lot of things you don't want to spend time on, including debating on what kind of device to standardize on, because, well, devices these days, it's kind of a religion. Mac users will rarely want to give up their Mac. Windows users will a lot of times not accept having to use a Mac, for example. You also have people that are not they're going to be leaving Linux, but with Windows 365, you can just say that, well, cloud PCs, that's what we are going to be working on. That's where you will be working. Whatever device you have, that's fine. Use whatever you want, as long as you're working in your cloud PC. And these reasons might also apply to other scenarios, but I feel that's for startups, that's a good fit for the Windows 365 service. Another one is if you need quick onboarding of users. I stated this as a reason why, that you have really fast onboarding. If you're using Windows 365 Business, purchase a license, assign it, wait for an hour, you're good to go. If you're using Windows 365 Enterprise, you spend a little more time tuning policies, perhaps even some images. But after that, it's just purchasing licenses and assigning them and waiting around for the cloud PCs to be provisioned. And this is great in cases like if you have a big project coming along, you're bringing on a lot of consultants or other temporary staff. Instead of either purchasing physical devices for them or incorporating their current physical devices in your setup, just purchase Windows 365 Cloud PCs and they can work online. Another case where you might need quick onboarding if you're doing a merger with another big company. So you have your company with your tenants and that other company with their tenants. And instead of doing guest users and mixing and matching, you can have your tenants with Windows 365 set up and provide the users from that other company with Windows 365 licenses. They can use those cloud PCs as if they were a regular user in your tenant, and they can still have access to that other tenant, getting the best of both worlds. In the case for the big project, for example, you would also probably want some quick offboarding. And offboarding users from Windows 365 is basically as easy as removing their license. There's no need to recycle any devices or deprovision them, securely delete data on them. You just remove the license and they are cut off from their cloud PC, and that cloud PC will then automatically be deprovisioned at some point. So that's also a good scenario for using Windows 365. Another one is if you need some temporary workstation. This kind of ties in with the last point, but say you want to enable your users to quickly get back to work after some theft or loss. This could be if their device is stolen, lost, damaged, or in any way become unusable. Instead of having them sitting around twiddling their thumbs, waiting for a new laptop or for a repairman or something like that, assign them a Windows 365 license, and they could be back to working within an hour or even less. Like I said, most people today have a phone, tablet, laptop lying around, so they can use that as a temporary workstation because all the workload is done in the Windows 365 Cloud PC. Anyway, one of the coolest scenarios for Windows 365 is as jump boxes. Now, this is mostly for enterprise. You can use Windows 365 Business for it by installing VPN clients and that kind of things, but using Windows 365 enterprise cloud PCs is as jump boxes is quite seamless. You can use them to act as jump boxes into more secure or locked down environments. Since they are attached to a VNet in Azure, it's up to you to do firewall rules and routing the way that you want. Basically, you have total control over the network traffic within your own Azure tenant. So the cloud PCs are not exposed directly to the internet, so there's no other way into them than through Windows 365, and the access there is controlled by you using, for example, MFA, conditional access, and the other Microsoft 365 security tools that you have. And this way, your users can access servers and other components on their internal addresses, meaning that you can have servers and other components not be exposed to the internet at all. You can put up firewalls all over the place. So using the cloud PCs as jump boxes is a great use case for Windows 365. Another one is if your company is under strict regulations regarding company data, where it's located, where it can be transferred, and so on. Then Windows 365 can aid you in abiding those regulations. Sure, you can manage your end users' physical devices and set up all kinds of measures to make sure that the data stored on them is as safe as possible. But isn't it easier if the data is never stored on those physical devices? Set up your tenant in a way that doesn't allow data on physical devices, enables you to have total control over where the data is located. And with Windows 365 Enterprise, you can even make sure that the data doesn't leave a US borders. For example, if you have a requirement for your data to be only within US borders, you have your infrastructure in US, you have your cloud PCs in the US, and that way the data does not leave US borders, making it easier to comply with regulations that require those kind of things. Also, if you prefer operational expenditures over capital expenditures, this could be a personal preference, it could be a company preference, but it could also be the only choice that you have. Investing in a physical device is well, they might be better in the long run, but if you can't afford one, then purchasing a Windows 365 license and paying for that on a monthly basis is, that might be your only choice. Also, a lot of people and companies prefer having operational expenditures over capital expenditures. It's often more easy to swallow a short or little sum each month than one big cost each and every year or every 3 years. If you want your IT department to have a simpler time of doing management, then Windows 365 is also a great fit, because if you're taking away management of physical devices and letting your IT department use MEM for all its management means a simpler time and more time freed up to do a better job at managing what you actually want to manage. So you can spend more time on doing a better job on managing your cloud PCs if you don't have to worry about physical devices, for example. Another cool scenario is if you have some latency or distance challenges in your company. Say you have your infrastructure in one region and you have your users in a faraway galaxy or region, and they are using apps that are sensitive to latency. Those users might have a bad time. It might not be enough to have VPNs or even express routes, but you can deploy your Windows 365 Enterprise Cloud PCs in the same region as your infrastructure, and that way the apps on them will have little to no latency to your infrastructure. The only latency you have to worry about in those kind of cases is the one from your end user's device into the nearest Windows 365 control plane. But that shouldn't be an issue at all. Usually, if you can stream a movie from Netflix, then you can use Windows 365 without any latency issues or bandwidth issues at all. So in that case, just instead of having users using VPN, use cloud PCs, run apps on them, and have those cloud PCs be in the same region as your infrastructure. And of course, these last two ones, if these are your goal, then Windows 365 is a great tool to have in order to reach that goal. If you want to deliver the same user experience, no matter where or on what device, then Windows 365 is a good tool to deliver that. Because, like I stated, the workspace and the user experience is the same across every time you connect, from everywhere you connect, and yeah, you can use whatever device your users want to use. And before we move on to when you shouldn't be using Windows 365, let's take a look at a couple of scenarios and how you can design a Windows 365 setup for those kind of scenarios. Looking first at the Windows 365 business. Well, it's such a simple service that this is basically the only way you can design it. Or rather, there's not a whole lot of design involved at all. You have your endpoints, your end users over here. They connect over the internet to the control plane. The control plane then speaks to your cloud PCs, which then in turn speaks to Office 365, the internet, or whatever applications you have on your cloud PCs. There's not a whole lot you can build upon this, but of course you can try to install some VPN clients on your cloud PCs and connect to other services as well. But like I said, Windows 365 Business is such a simple service that it's not a whole lot of design involved at all. Windows 365 Enterprise, on the other hand, is a little more complex. It has some more components involved, and this is pretty much the simplest design you can do of Windows 365 Enterprise today. As I said, you have a requirement to have domain controllers. Domain controllers need to be in sync with Azure AD using Azure AD Connect. But other than that, it's quite similar to the Windows 365 Business in that you have your endpoints connecting over the internet to the control plane. The control plane then speaks with your cloud PC, and the cloud PCs speak to Office 365 services, the internet, whatever you put on those cloud PCs. One thing to notice is that the cloud PCs in this case is located within a VNet in Azure. As I stated, the requirement for Windows 365 Enterprise is that you have a VNet in your tenant, and your cloud PCs will be connected to that VNet. And Azure AD joined Cloud PCs are coming for Windows 365 Enterprise, but it's not GA yet. When it does come, it will remove the need for the domain controller and AD Connect here. But it will also remove the need for a VNet, meaning that you can have your Cloud PCs connected to a Microsoft managed VNet, or meaning that in that case, the Windows 365 Enterprise design will look pretty much the same as the Windows 365 Business design. So those two are the simplest designs you can do, but let's jump on to a design that is a bit more complex, a bit more fun. And when I mentioned that you can use Windows 365 as jump boxes into more secure and locked down environment, this is the kind of setup I was talking about. Here it's somewhat similar to the last design, but you have your endpoints on the right side. They connect to the internet, to the control plane. Control plane speaks to your Cloud PCs. And from there, your Cloud PCs can communicate with domain controllers, but also to another VNet that we have here with some storage accounts, some servers, some SQL databases. And as you can see, we have some firewalls here and there, meaning that each and every connection to and from the Cloud PCs within your Azure tenant is firewall protected. As I said, the only way in is through the control plane. The access there is controlled by you. And yeah, in this kind of scenario, you have total control over the network traffic. So you have a locked down environment. But you can also expand upon this kind of setup quite a lot. For example, if you have an on-prem environment, you can have a VPN connection down here to your on-prem environment, meaning that for your end users, they don't have to use a VPN to connect to your on-prem. They can go through their Cloud PC and that way communicate with your on-prem environments, removing the need for any VPN clients for your users, and yeah, an even easier time for them to access applications. So yeah, this way you can use your Cloud PCs as jump boxes to more secure environments or even your on-prem environment as well. Another scenario I briefly talked about is the latency or distance challenge. In this kind of scenario, in this example, we have users over here in Asia and we have some infrastructure over in West Europe. And having your users connect directly to these infrastructure components over public internet or even your own WAN might not be a best case scenario, given that you are not in total control over the network. You might experience latency issues. But if you, instead of running the applications over here on devices in Asia, you can run applications on the Cloud PCs that is located in West Europe together with your infrastructure components, meaning that your users run their apps on the Cloud PCs. The apps have little to no latency to your infrastructure components. And yeah, your users will have a better time experience. Here, the only thing that you really can't control is the public connection to the control plane. But that's only a really small amount of data. And basically, it's just screen images from the Cloud PCs that is transferred over that public internet. So yeah, like I said, if you can stream a movie from, say, Netflix, then you're probably going to be having a good Windows 365 time as well. So after all this hoorah, is there really any time where Windows 365 is not great? Spoiler alert, yes, there is. For example, if you want to keep costs as low as possible, if cost is your main concern, then I would say don't go for Windows 365. Simplicity also usually comes with a cost, and that is also the case for Windows 365. It's simple and therefore a bit more costly than other services. And you might be thinking that, hey, you said it was cheap, and yeah, I stand by that standpoint. But as I said, it depends on what you compare it against. Using services like Azure Virtual Desktop, where you can stack multiple users on one VM, will be cheaper because then those users can share the same amount of resources that you would reserved for one user in the Windows 365 case. And this is kind of the same kind of scenario we had when we were transitioning from physical servers to virtual servers. It's the same principle. You want to have one set of resources and share them across multiple users in this case. So if you want to keep costs as low as possible, having personal cloud PCs is not the greatest choice. Having shared cloud PCs or VMs or session hosts in Azure Virtual Desktop will be a bit cheaper for you. Another scenario where Windows 365 cannot help you is if you need application streaming. Say you want to have your users utilize their local hardware and only offload some apps to Windows 365. In those cases, users will need to run applications on their local device and then sign into their Cloud PC desktop and run applications there and then switch back and forth between desktops. Not a great user-friendly solution. A better one would be to stream those applications seamlessly to your end user's device and have them appear as if though they were installed locally. And Windows 365 can't do that. Solutions like AVD can, where you just stream the application and not the entire desktop to your end users, and making it appear as though the applications were installed locally, which is kind of nice. Another scenario is if you need a specific geolocation. Windows 365 Business leaves you with no control over where your cloud PCs are, and Windows 365 Enterprise leaves you with some control, but you are limited to that list of supported regions. So, for example, say you want to have your cloud PCs running in Norway because you don't want your company data leaving Norwegian borders, then forget about it. You can't use Windows 365 because the Norwegian regions are not on that supported list. If you need a specific geolocation, you are limited to that supported region list, those 14 I mentioned earlier. If the geolocation you need is not on that list, then you can't use Windows 365. Another case where Windows 365 doesn't shine is if flexibility is a key concern for you, because like Microsoft says themselves, Windows 365 is optimized for simplicity, not for flexibility. And simplicity and flexibility rarely go hand in hand. If you want more flexibility, you oftentimes have to sacrifice some simplicity. So yeah, Windows 365 is optimized for simplicity, but do you know which service is optimized for flexibility? That's right, our beloved Azure Virtual Desktop. It's more complex, but it's so much more flexible in terms of possibilities, performance, costs, and so on. You have a lot greater range of in terms of what VM sizes, for example, how you want to pay for your servers, for example. So if your choices for simplicity versus flexibility, if you tend to lean against simplicity, then Windows 365 is great. But if you need that extra flexibility, then I would go for Azure Virtual Desktop. Another scenario where Windows 365 cannot provide you with the thing you need is if you need a GPU. Because currently no of the Windows 365 SKUs support a GPU. So if that is something you need, you would have to go for something like Azure Virtual Desktop or another kind of service. This is on the roadmap for Windows 365 though, so somewhere in the future you will have Windows 365 Cloud PCs options with a GPU. It might be there sooner than I think, but yeah, as of today, if you need a GPU, you can't use Windows 365. And the same goes for if you need really powerful workstations, even besides the GPU. If I remember correctly, the beefiest Windows 365 license you can purchase gives you 8 cores, 32 gigs of RAM, and 512 gigs of storage at a cost of what is it, $158 or so, assuming you have hybrid benefits. And that's not extremely powerful, and it's certainly not cheap. It might be good for a short period of time, but in the long run, buying that kind of hardware is certainly better You can also take a look at, for example, with the Azure Virtual Desktop, you can have session hosts that are really, really beefy and have them powered on when you are using it, and then power them down, in that way saving costs when you're not using them. Yeah, if you need really powerful workstations, then I would not suggest you use Windows 365. You look elsewhere for other solutions. And same goes if you are in the need for low latency access to your on-prem data. This could be if you have on-prem data storage, 3D printers, 3D scanners, manufacturing equipment, any scenario where you're in the need of low latency access to those on-prem stuff. Even if you have ExpressRoute and all the best stuff, nothing beats sitting in the same room or in the same building as your on-prem data. So it goes without saying that a cloud service will never have the same kind of latency to an on-prem as an on-prem solution. So in those kind of cases, you should probably go for on-prem physical devices, or you could even consider running Azure Virtual Desktop on the Azure Stack, which is a thing now. So yeah, I see that we are good on time. So let's take a look at some of the news that was announced around Windows 365 on Ignite last week. Finally, we have Windows 11 support. This was previously blocked by Windows 11's requirement for a TPM chip. Now in Windows 365, you have a virtual TPM chip making Windows 11 supported. This is GA for Enterprise. I'm not quite sure how things are for the business flavor, but if it's not there, then it's certainly not far off. One new feature that was announced in preview now is the option to force deprovision of your cloud PCs. Usually when you deprovision or remove a Windows 365 license from a user, that user's cloud PC is deprovisioned after a 7-day grace period. But with this feature, you have the option to start that deprovisioning process earlier or immediately or somewhere along in that 7-day period. And as I spoke about, the Azure AD joined cloud PCs are coming for Enterprise. It's currently in a closed preview, which might sound kind of weird given that for Windows 365 Enterprise, having your cloud PCs Azure AD joined is the only option. But that's how it is. Another thing was that you have a couple of more reports in MEM, mainly in order to aid in troubleshooting your Windows 365 environment and sizing your cloud PCs correctly, so you have a better understanding on how the resources on your cloud PCs are used. If your users are, for example, using all their resources, maybe it's time to step up in license and give them a beefier cloud PC. This new report aids you in finding those cloud PCs. You also have some enhancements to Windows365.microsoft.com, which is the web client for Windows 365. These features are in preview and include faster load times, better reliability, the option to edit settings while in session, some alternative keyboard settings, and a couple more features there. So that's good. Hopefully they are not too far off being GA. Lastly, you now have an option to choose between a standard user and a local admin for the users of your cloud PC. This is for the business flavor, and it's not stated whether this is GA or in preview, but having the option to give your users total control over the cloud PC, which was the previous option, or just some, is really good. So yeah, it's a good thing that that feature is coming as well. And that was the news around Windows 365 from Ignite. I did set up a Q&A slide just so if there are some questions, we can try to answer those.
Well, thank you for a great session. Yeah, there's been a lot of questions. I try to answer most of them, but I saved some for you.
Oh, cool.
So you can, for example, does Windows 365 support single sign-on from the Windows 365 portal?
I believe the answer is no, but as far as I remember, the Azure AD joined cloud PCs will be getting that option later on, I think. But currently, I think the answer is no.
And I fear there's more questions you can answer afterwards as well, if you like, in the chat. Does it support Windows Hello authentication is another one.
Again, the Azure AD joined ones will support it, if I'm not mistaken, but currently no. So sadly.
Yeah, it's still a pretty new product, so a lot of features are still coming, so it's really cool.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, like you said, it's a pretty new feature. I'm not how old is it? Is it a few months or so? It's not extremely old. New features will be coming quite rapidly, I guess, and since it shares the control plane with Azure Virtual Desktop, and those services are quite similar, any features coming to Azure Virtual Desktop will surely be coming to Windows 365 at some point.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for a great session. And we have 9 minutes for you all to grab a cup of coffee and some refreshments and maybe some fresh air before our next session is coming up, which is with Michael and Ben on single sign-on to domain resources from Azure AD joined devices. See you in 9 minutes all.